It's such an honor to be chosen to speak on this very momentous occasion. I would like to start my presentation with a very short story about me, my own journey as an adolescent, and why this session is so important. I was 13 years old when I was recruited into a peer approach to counseling by teenagers program, which was run by the Botswana YWCA. This was a drive to get young girls and boys to be engaged in life skills development, to talk about all things SRHR, and to deal with what was then a raging HIV/AIDS epidemic. By all means, I represent a generation that many worried would not make it through. We were the generation that could have easily been wiped out by this epidemic. And consequently, any program that promised to turn the tide on HIV was invested in and got all of us young people involved. Through PACT, I would later learn to talk about sexual and reproductive health. I learned about human rights. I learned what gender justice was all about. I learned about girls' empowerment, and I also learned about feminism. I was always aware that my reality as a girl was significantly different from those of my peers, the boys. And so I was always astounded by how conversations that would always seemingly put us girls in boxes. We were meant to behave in a certain way, we were meant to do things and be a certain type of a girl. And I remember how I used to question everything. I would question, why should girls behave in a certain way? Why should girls be quiet? And why should girls be expected to take on gender roles that seemingly were very unfair? At 15, I finally stepped into the very magical world of being a young person who had mentors, was supported, and my leadership potential developed. I was also then christened into the feminist ideology. I was in love. I was bewildered by this concept that seemingly encompassed everything I believed in, and really, for me, began the root or the foundation of young people being engaged in the future. It was a concept that was so embracing of my knowledge, who I was, the existence I wanted to have, and where I wanted to go in life. I share my story because I have now become a practitioner. I now manage programs for young people. So I know firsthand what it means to be a young person, googly eyed, really interested in a program and wondering what it has for you. I know firsthand also how programs tend to have young people on the periphery of their own development. And so a lot of investment that goes into really looking at young people as an investment and programs that appeal to me and to the heart and the passion of the work that I do. Fast forward to 2020, and here we are having a conversation about what works for us in 2020 to achieve the promise of adolescents, sexual and reproductive health and rights. And so I'd like to focus on the work that I do and make linkages to how young people are receiving this work and what can we do collectively together. It would be remiss of me not to acknowledge the context of COVID-19 and the way this is shaping our world, including us now having to have pre-recorded sessions and really missing the human touch. This year has not only forced us to stop, we now need to learn to listen, and we need to confront issues in ways that we haven't done before. We finally understand the importance of community and connection. Evidence shows that the additional negative impact of the pandemic on children and adolescents has both physical and mental health outcomes. A review by Shaw and others also affirms the statement that shows that mental disorders are already the leading cause of disability worldwide in young people. What more now in the context of COVID? They go on to say that about 15% of children and adolescents in the world have mental health disorders. And nearly 50% of those mental health disorders start to affect young people by the age of 14. So the one thing that COVID is really teaching us is that it is important to really stop in our tracks and think of ways that we can be more innovative and more responsive. From the field, we also know that COVID-19 has had severe impacts on young people's access to essential services. This includes what we have seen across the world, limited supplies or stockouts of antiretroviral therapy, as well as reduced access to other SRHR commodities. We're seeing an increase in unplanned pregnancies. We're seeing even more increases or perhaps more of a spotlight on gender-based violence, as well as young people's exposure to intimate partner violence and domestic violence. Regrettably, we've also seen how corruption has reared its ugly head. This has had such a drastic impact on the access to essential treatment and commodities for young people. And therefore, it becomes very critical for us to continuously check ourselves in terms of why this year is so significant, both in terms of this momentous event we're in, but also in terms of what this year really means for us moving forward. So, what does it mean for us to achieve the promise of adolescent and sexual reproductive health? And why is it important that we begin this session in this way? This is what we know for sure. And this is evidence from the ground and evidence from the programs and the young people who are beneficiaries of our programs. What we know is that to achieve these promises, we need to continue investing in models that are proven to be effective. At Ready or through Frontline AIDS, one of the things we do and always pay attention to is the evolving needs and capacities of young people. And so we premise a lot of our programming on socio-ecological models or theories that really help us to link individuals to their families, the communities they live in, other stakeholders in the environment within which they are, as well as the legal and political environment to support advocacy. Our programs also demonstrate a social return on investment, meaning that when you invest in evidence-led and evidence-informed programs, you're able to actually measure the impact of these programs. One of the things that I actually wanted to share with you, we've just had a study, a social return on investment study, which has shown that one of our flagship programs, Ready Plus, has actually proven to have quite a huge or significant social return on investment. For every dollar invested, we're getting back nearly $4 of worth and value in terms of how the program is designed. What we also know is that we need to invest in capacity development of young people so that we do not continue to be the generation that sees young people as tokens for our development, but rather as agents and meaningfully involved in doing so. Some of the work that we also know in terms of what works and what we need to do is that we need to work with a cross-section of stakeholders. This includes service providers, healthcare workers, traditional leaders, and everyone else to ensure that young people continue to gain access to reproductive health and other services and treatment. As I said before, we need to engage communities, we need to engage families, and we need to do so to make sure that they also have a mind shift in the gains that we need to achieve for young people. Age alone, especially in Africa, is not a determinant of progress or development. A 15 or a 16-year-old in the global north is very far much more advanced than a 16-year-old in the global south who has even more of a burden when it comes to responsibilities. And so what we also know as programmers is that age alone should not be a determinant of how we program, the expanse of our programs, and what we need to do in response. We need to empower young people to have a voice and to inform service delivery. For us, this is a key action around accountability. Young people are not only users of services, young people are also informers and leaders when it comes to service delivery. It then becomes very important to ensure that they're able to give feedback on what we're doing right and areas where we need to improve. And finally, something that we also know is that we need to invest in communications and digital solutions. We cannot expect young people to respond to what was common 10, 15 years ago. Therefore, we need to make sure that our work should be interesting, it should be engaging, it should be current, and it should use all the media streams that have young people excited and invigorated to learn more. And that is why through the programs we're seeing across the globe that are very impactful, there's a huge focus on social media. It's about Twitter, it's Instagram, it's Facebook, it's webinars, and we're all forced to move with the times. I must also say COVID-19 has really shown us that we need to use technology in different ways. What do we still need to do? And this is basically learning from what have we not gotten right and what do we need to improve on. One of the things we still need to focus highly on is that we need to maintain integrated services and program responses. What this essentially means is that in order to achieve the promises for young people, we need to look at them in a holistic manner. We need to really see them for who they are and the different ways in which they occupy their own spaces and how they define themselves. We need to maintain a treatment adherence focus. Multiple studies have shown that where adherence is supported, be through innovative solutions like income generation projects, buddy systems, peer approach methods, that you tend to get higher adherence. And therefore, this continues to be an investment focus. We also know that the impact of mental health is one that has enduring consequences. And so there is a need to continue investing in the mental health and psychosocial support for young people globally. We need to include education, vocational skills, and employment in our programs. And this speaks to a very multisectoral approach or response into how we program. And I would like to pause here for a moment, because often when we think of sexual reproductive health and rights or HIV, we tend to think of them alone. And we're seeing increasingly that evidence shows that a much more comprehensive or integrated response usually has better impact. And I'll show this as we go into the next slides. The other thing we need to focus and strengthen rather, is to continue investing in youth leadership, in their agency, and in ensuring that voices of young people translate to impact. We need to open up spaces for policy advocacy, both at a national, regional, and within international development frameworks. Ultimately, we need to rattle, shake, and disrupt the status quo. One of my favorite quotes, and this really comes from, I suppose, what I'm trying to really drive across as a message. It's one that says the personal is political. It underscores the strong linkages between our personal experiences and how we interact with our society and the political environment. Thus, it is also my request to all of you to ensure that programming should not be an 8 to 5 job as it is for many of us, and instead it should be a definition of how we should support young people to occupy space, to have a voice, and to do things differently and change the world. How do we do it? And just to give you a snapshot into the way in which Ready does this work, and in ways that what I have already discussed as evidence-led links to all of this. Integrated programming. So we approach all our programming with young people from a perspective that there is a focus in terms of what you need to target, but you also need to provide complementary services. And so through integrated programming within the Ready portfolio at Frontline AIDS, we recognize that young people living with HIV require a specific response, but one that does not exclude other needs such as SRHR support, gender transformation work, and also linking them to additional services like income generation activities and economic livelihoods. We also recognize the importance to develop a new generation of leaders who will speak to these issues, and we do this through a program of ours that's called Ready to Lead. We've also had programs that have invested heavily in terms of mapping and the use of information systems and technology around helping young people to control information and to have access. very exciting projects that we have done. Something else that we do is around meaningful youth engagement, which I've touched on quite a bit. And we invest a lot on learning and development. So, what are young people saying about the strides made thus far? I can talk to you about Ayanda, one of our brilliant cats from Eswatini, who uses her life experience to mentor and provide psychosocial support to other young people. She does this because she understands firsthand the impact of stigma and discrimination for young people living with HIV. I have another story from Tanzania of how some of our young cats were involved in policy and legislation change as they tried to work towards changing the age of consent and really providing evidence in terms of why policymakers and other decision makers should be included in these processes. I can also share a story about Audrey from Zimbabwe, who talks about the gendered aspects of SRHR and HIV. She is a reminder, or rather, she reminds us every day that we cannot think of young people as this monolithic creature, but that young people represent an intersectionality that needs to go into how we program. If you take nothing else from my story and the work that so many of us do, take this with you. Please understand that for some of us, the impact that we potentially have in the world is one that we need to forever look into. We need to invest in solutions that are innovative and that really put young people at the forefront. We need to move away from doing work as usual, and we need to invest in young people-centered approaches. This means creating spaces for programs to respond to the evolving needs and capacities of young people. We need to reduce the red tape and the impossible requirements for enabling programmers to respond to young people's needs. We need to create spaces and trust that young people can lead, can innovate, and engage in much better ways than we possibly can imagine. This is what actually colors the lives of young people. And COVID-19, if anything, has proven that some of the stringent processes we tend to get bogged down with are just a process that can be dealt away with. Most of all, we need to invest in scaling up work that has been proven effective, such as the Ready projects that I've shared, and we need to speak up in every space that we occupy, that young people occupy, in order to get more funding, more buy-in, more political will in supporting the future of our young people.